Now that I've mounted the rear ride height sensors, it's time to mount the front sensors, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult up front probably just because of the packaging constraints. There's a lot more going on up here with upper and lower control arms and the way that the shock is mounted and the fact that the tire turns, so we just have to make sure it clears everything. There's a few options I can see right off the bat, which would be mounting it to the side of the airbag tower here, and where the upper control arm mounts, there's enough of a flange on the side that we can probably mount this up. It looks like it will clear the airbag, and it should clear all of the suspension travel. So that's kind of looking like my go-to. Another option is going to be to mount it to the frame rail on the other side of the shock here, and have the pickup point go back here and connect to the arm somewhere. And so that's one option too. That might be pretty nice. One of the things that you have to figure out with these is they have a range of motion that is 120 degrees, I believe. And so you need to figure out how much what you want to connect it to moves to figure out which one of these three mounting surfaces that you need. So Airlift Performance gives you a really nice manual that tells you the range of motion for each of these three. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fully deflate the front suspension system and get it slammed all the way down and take a measurement based on a few different locations depending on where I think that this will mount. And then we'll air it all the way up and take another measurement, and that will tell me if I need to use the full length of the arm, the middle mount, the inner mount. And that's really going to matter, because if I only need to use the innermost mount, then the package for this gets a lot smaller and I can tuck it up in more places. And so that'll be nice. If the range of motion is the one on the end here, then I'll need to make sure, you know, that there's room for that. So first things first, let's take some measurements with the system aired all the way out and aired all the way up, and then let's go from there. And we'll call that 4.5 long. And we'll take the outboard measurement here. Call that 4 1/8 long. And then we'll take a measurement from back here, and we'll call that 2.5. All right, so we have cycled through the suspension. We now have it aired all the way out. You can see the shock is just about all the way compressed. So we really got the fitment nailed on that shock, which is nice. And so here are the measurements I took. So this middle one represents what would basically be the third hole on the sensor when I mount it to the shock tower or the airbag tower, and that gives us about 4 1/8 inches of travel right there. This right here represents from the frame to the lower control arm. So if we had the sensor mounted right here and a little tab right here, that is 2 inches. Okay, so we have 4 1/8 and 2 inches. Now we look at the installation guide from Airlift here, and you can see, if you can get it without the light here, so you can see the first hole, second hole, third hole, and then the maximum and minimum range. So the first hole, 2 3/4 maximum, 1 13/16 minimum. So if we mounted it to the frame, we'd be using the first hole, and we'd be able to cut off the rest of the sensor. Now, the second range of motion is 4 3/16 and 2 7/8. The third, 5 5/8 and 4 3/16. So if we mounted the sensor right up here to the airbag tower, we would be just on the edge of the range of motion for the second hole. Now, the car will definitely be aired all the way out when it's parked, but it's not going to be aired all the way up and driving too often, because then you're going to run into some clearance issues with arms contacting parts of the frame and everything else. I really designed this thing to be driving around about 3 inches of ride height, with it functional up to 5 inches. And so the last 1.5 to 2 inches of travel at the top are not going to really be used. And so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. So this is about 4 1/8, and that second slot goes from 4 3/16 to 2 7/8. So we're right on the top end, only got about an 1/8 inch more of travel. One of the things that we can do is connecting it closer to the frame. As you go closer to the frame, the travel of the arm becomes less. That's just as a function of the arc that the lower control arm takes, obviously. And so one of the things that we could also possibly do is go and mount the pickup point a little more inboard for the sensor if we're going to do it on the tower, and use the second one. Now the other thing I got to think about is servicing, if I ever need to replace one of these or fine tune them at all and get at the wiring, which is going to be the easier place to install them. And then also I want to make sure that it's out of the way for as much road grime and stuff as possible. So one of the things I do want to check real quick is get it aired all the way back up and make sure that this arm isn't going to get in the way of the sensor. I don't think it is. The sensor is going to mount right about here if I choose to mount it there. The other thing too is the airbag definitely squishes out when it is fully deflated, and so this arm right now is close to contacting the bellows of the airbag here. Now it's going to get, this is going to get spaced out a little bit by the plastic back cap here. So let me put that on. So with that plastic cap, we have some clearance between the airbag, but a nut has to go on the back side here. And so one of the options that we could always do is just make a little aluminum plate to go behind this to shim it out further. Should be a nice simple solution to take care of that. The other thing to think about too is we're going to want to use the nutsert tool like we did for the rear 2 height sensors to be able to mount this. And so we need to make sure that we can get the nutsert tool in to crimp the nutsert where we want it to. Otherwise, there are other options, I suppose. You can rivet a nutsert on with just a spacer and a bolt, so that's an option. But let's do a couple quick little tests here, and then let's get to work.
My, oh my. Wait till Old Man Clemens realizes it's a bag of shit.